He stood at the edge of the room, a silent figure in a storm of polished suits and smug laughter, the only black executive in a sea of ambition masked as civility. His ideas had been ridiculed, his presence tolerated but never welcomed, his voice drowned beneath layers of corporate arrogance. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to see, was that the very proposal they laughed at, the one they shredded and mocked in front of a full boardroom, would soon become the blueprint that determined the fate of them all. And when the truth came out, it wouldn't just shift power. It would shatter the illusion that control belonged to those who looked the part. If you're ready to dive into a story of humiliation, betrayal, and one of the coldest reversals of power ever told in the corporate world, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. What would you do if the one they tried to erase came back holding everything they once denied him? Let's find out. The boardroom on the 32nd floor of Halston Corporate Tower shimmered with cold professionalism. Sunlight glinted off the glass-topped conference table and danced along the chrome edges of modern lighting fixtures. The room smelled of fresh brewed coffee, polished wood, and the sharp tension of quarterly reckoning. Executives in tailored suits filled the seats, their eyes fixed on Director Colton Vexley as he adjusted his cufflinks like a man preparing for a kill. He was in his element, an apex predator in a jungle of silence and performance metrics. Everyone knew how these meetings went. You impressed Colton or you bled in the silence. At the far end of the table, Dorian Marks adjusted the sleeves of his navy suit and tried to still the tremor in his hand. In front of him rested a printed document, his proposal. He had spent 3 months building it. Late nights, skipped weekends, dinners eaten over spreadsheets. It wasn't just numbers and charts, it was vision. A forward-facing rebranding model designed to transform the company's stagnant market presence into a digital powerhouse. He called it the Horizon Initiative. It was bold, adaptive, and rooted in inclusive market research. It was also his chance to finally move out of the invisible margins they'd pushed him into. Colton tapped a pen against his glass water tumbler. All right, next up, Marks. You've been sitting quiet all year. Let's hear what you've been cooking. Dorian rose, sliding the document across the table. Thank you, Director Vexley, he began, voice steady but cautious. This is the Horizon Initiative. It's a market repositioning and operations streamlining framework designed to capitalize on emerging digital sectors. It integrates global trend analysis, sustainable growth models, and Colton picked up the first page and skimmed it with the disinterest of a man reading a grocery receipt. Then he flipped to the second, then the third. By the time Dorian reached page 10, Colton was shaking his head. Jesus, he muttered. What is this? He stood abruptly, holding the proposal like a contaminated napkin. A Pinterest dream board. The room stiffened. Dorian paused, lips parting to explain, but Colton cut him off. You call this leadership? This is a vision plan? You've cited a cosmetic startup and 2 community-based fintechs as your case studies. We're a legacy institution. We don't collaborate with influencers, we drive capital. You think this company is built on TikToks and hashtags? Dorian's face remained composed, but the flush in his ears betrayed him. Director, with respect, the data supports the shifts in. Colton tore the document in half with a clean, deliberate motion. The rip echoed like a gunshot across the sterile room. Dorian froze. Everyone froze. Let me stop you right there, kid, Colton said, tossing the halves across the table. They landed just shy of Dorian's laptop. Get your head out of the clouds. This company needs men, not slogans. You want to lead? Start by understanding we're not a charity. Someone exhaled sharply through their nose. A smothered chuckle. The kind of laughter that came not from amusement, but relief. It wasn't them in the line of fire. Dorian opened his mouth to speak again, but nothing came. His mind raced to recall a single friendly face in the room. None looked at him. Most looked at Colton, waiting for his next move like obedient dogs. This is what happens when you try to force creativity into analytics, Colton continued, returning to his chair. We asked for a strategy. You brought us a brochure. Next time, leave the crayons at home. The air in the room tightened. Dorian remained standing, hands frozen at his sides. His heart pounded, each beat louder than the last. Colton glanced at his assistant. "Let's move on. We've wasted enough time. Someone bring me real numbers." The next presenter stood hesitantly. The meeting continued as if nothing had happened. Dorian slowly sat back down. He stared at the pieces of his proposal like someone examining a broken artifact. He didn't pick them up. He didn't speak again. When the meeting ended, no one approached him. His colleagues filed out quickly, clutching laptops, avoiding eye contact. Only one lingered, a junior analyst named Marcy, who glanced back with wide eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry," before disappearing down the corridor. Dorian gathered the torn pages in silence. His hands trembled as he placed them back in the folder. It felt like gathering pieces of himself. On his way back to his desk, the halls felt colder, the walls taller. The place he had worked in for 5 years had never felt so unfamiliar. When he reached his cubicle, there was an envelope sitting neatly on his keyboard, unsigned. Inside was a printout of a meme: "Participation trophies don't build profits." He stared at it for a long time, didn't crumple it, didn't throw it away, just sat in the cheap full leather chair and stared. But the whispers had already started, low, subtle exchanges near the elevators, clumsy pauses in conversation when he walked by. No one mentioned the proposal. No one needed to. In their silence, the humiliation replayed itself. By mid-morning, Dorian sat at his desk reviewing quarterly numbers for a new rollout, attempting to refocus, when he received an automated notification from the internal feedback system. "Your biannual peer review summary is now available." Curious, hoping perhaps that someone had seen through Colton's performance, he clicked it open. The summary was clinical, stripped of warmth or recognition. His direct accomplishments: successful market testing, innovative design layouts, solid ROI modeling, were reduced to generic phrases like "demonstrates some potential" and "needs stronger executive presence." That in itself stung, but it was nothing compared to the inserted comments under interpersonal impact. One line stood out in bold. "At times, Dorian has exhibited emotional volatility under pressure, showing a pattern of defensiveness and overreaction to constructive feedback." Another read, "Can be overly sensitive to standard critique, which may limit his leadership capability in high-stakes environments." He felt the blood drain from his face. These weren't just vague criticisms. They were narrative-shaping weapons, the kind of phrases that, once planted in an executive ecosystem, rooted themselves deep and grew like vines, slowly choking out reputations. And Dorian knew, with chilling clarity, that none of these comments had been offered in his earlier drafts. They were new, manipulated. He suspected who had done it without needing proof. Colton Vexley had the access and the motive. The reviews had been tampered with. For a moment, Dorian just stared at the screen, jaw clenched, mind racing. His first instinct was to document everything, to screen capture and save records, to prepare a defense. But even as he moved to click, a calendar invite popped up in the top right corner of his screen. HR Meeting Room 6B. Time, 1:30 p.m. Requested by Julianne Weeks, HR Manager. No agenda attached. No context. Just a sterile meeting block appearing the same day as his reviews, as if orchestrated with precision. When he arrived at room 6B, the door was already open. Julianne sat across a table with 2 printed forms and a legal pad. Her face bore the neutral professionalism of someone trying not to blink at the stench in the room. "Dorian, thank you for coming," she said, gesturing for him to sit. He obliged, every muscle tight. "There's been a report we need to discuss." "Report?" he asked, his voice measured. "From who?" "It's a bit delicate," she replied, unfolding a form. There was a concern raised by a member of the strategic partnerships team, someone named Emma Brousseau. She reported a hostile interaction last Friday, claimed you confronted her in the elevator, and used aggressive language regarding her criticism of your proposal. Dorian blinked. "Emma, who?" "Emma Brousseau," Julianne repeated, scanning her notes. "She says you accused her of undermining you, made comments about her not understanding leadership, and that you closed the elevator door before she could step out." Dorian's mouth parted, disbelief tightening his brow. "I've never spoken to her. I don't even know what floor she works on." Julian paused, hesitating for the first time. "Well, she submitted a written statement. And, unfortunately, we have to follow up on all internal concerns, especially with your review also raising questions about emotional volatility." "That's not my review," Dorian said flatly. "At least, it wasn't until someone edited it." Julianne looked up, interested for the first time. "Edited? Can you explain?" Dorian leaned forward, voice low. "I submitted my peer feedback 2 weeks ago. The comments now on my profile weren't there in the version I sent for finalization. Someone changed it." She blinked, then recovered. "That's a serious claim." "Not as serious as what you're implying right now," Dorian said. "Because whatever Emma wrote is false. I've never had a conversation with her. You can check camera footage. I never entered the elevator with her Friday." Julianne scribbled a note. "We can pull footage. In the meantime, I'll need you to write a brief statement responding to her allegation. Just a standard step." "Standard step?" Dorian echoed. "Sure." He stood slowly, resisting the temptation to let his anger show. But as he turned to leave, something caught his eye just outside the glass pane of room 6B. Colton Vexley, standing down the hall, coffee in hand, speaking casually to another department lead. He wasn't looking at them, but Dorian knew. He knew this had Colton's fingerprints all over it. This wasn't about a misunderstanding in an elevator. It was a precision strike, reputation sabotage wrapped in procedure. Colton had escalated the humiliation from public dismissal to institutional gaslighting. Dorian left the room, his mind already listing next steps: save files, find the earlier review timestamp, request badge swipe logs. But he also knew it might not matter. The trap was already sprung. All it took was a whisper in HR and a few keystrokes in the feedback tool. Now, to anyone who mattered, he wasn't just a failed presenter. He was emotionally unstable, combative, a liability, and there was no evidence Colton had touched a thing. Back at his desk, the air felt different. It wasn't just cold, it was clinical, like the building itself had turned against him. Marcy walked by, opened her mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it. People were already choosing sides. He tried again, slower. Same result. A security staffer across the hall glanced at him but said nothing. It took a full 10 minutes and 2 unanswered calls to IT before a passing coworker, Jeff from procurement, used his card to let Dorian through. "Weird," Jeff mumbled. "They've been having glitches lately." But his eyes didn't meet Dorian's. Once inside, Dorian walked to his cubicle and stopped cold. His desk was bare. His monitor, keyboard, and even the personal photo frame that once held a picture of his parents and sister were all gone. In their place was a folded note taped to the desk surface. "Office 3B relocation assigned. See Ops." It wasn't signed. He turned and marched directly to the floor administrator's desk. A woman named Janine, always polite but perpetually overworked, looked up as he approached. "Dorian, right?" she asked. "Yeah, sorry, your station's been reassigned. We're shifting a few personnel to optimize workspace efficiency." "Why wasn't I told?" he asked, voice even but hard. "It should have hit your inbox yesterday. Maybe it went to spam." He didn't bother replying. He turned and made his way to the elevator again, back down to the ground floor and across the lobby to the operations wing, where room 3B was located. It wasn't on the directory, so he had to ask a janitor in the hall. The man frowned. "Oh yeah, basement level. Access through the service elevator. It's where they used to keep old hardware. No windows, but real quiet." Real quiet, Dorian thought, was just code for forgotten. The service elevator rattled as it descended. When it opened, the air that greeted him was colder, tinged with the scent of printer toner and dust. Room 3B was a boxy, concrete-walled space with an exposed pipe along the ceiling and a flickering fluorescent light in the far corner. There were 3 workstations, 2 unoccupied, one piled with miscellaneous wires and unboxed routers. His name was scrawled on a temporary placard above the chair closest to the vending machine. He stood there for a long moment, gripping the strap of his bag, staring at the spot like it might vanish if he looked hard enough. But it didn't. This was his new space. He sat down, turned on the ancient monitor, and waited for the system to boot. 47 minutes later, after 4 restarts and a call to a disinterested IT tech, he finally accessed his dashboard, only to find that half of his permissions were gone. No access to project folders, proposal templates, or strategic planning tools. His email still worked, but his calendar was empty. He tried joining the weekly team huddle via the company's internal video platform. The screen blinked. "You do not have access to this meeting." He checked again. The meeting code was correct. The invite was still on his phone from earlier that week. He clicked join again. Same message. Dorian tried messaging his supervisor, Helena Crutchfield. The message returned undelivered. User permissions restricted. He sat back in his chair, staring at the wall. They were cutting him out, bit by bit, function by function. They hadn't fired him. They hadn't demoted him in title, but they had made him vanish. At 11:30 a.m., he walked upstairs to confront Helena directly. The receptionist outside her office told him Helena was in a closed-door session. He waited for 30 minutes until her assistant came out and informed him that Helena was unavailable all day. "She'll follow up," the assistant said vaguely, then hurried off. Back at his desk, or rather, his assigned bunker, Dorian received a system notification. Access rights updated. Contact admin for questions. He opened the update. All strategic proposal submission tools had been removed from his account. The platform he had used to submit the Horizon Initiative was now inaccessible. Even the draft folder, where he had stored years of idea iterations, was gone. He called IT again. "Must be a glitch," they said. "We'll escalate it." He knew they wouldn't. At 2:15 p.m., a janitor entered room 3B and began refilling the vending machine. He looked surprised to see Dorian. "Didn't know anyone worked down here anymore," he said casually. Dorian forced a smile. "Just me, apparently." The man nodded, said nothing more, and left. The vending machine hummed. The lights flickered again. Dorian tried once more to access a meeting scheduled for 3 p.m. Rejected. He tried logging into his proposal archive. Blocked. He checked the internal directory to message a colleague. His messaging function had been downgraded to read only. Even hallway conversations had become different, if not absent entirely. Coworkers passed him without nods. People who once exchanged ideas with him over lunch now barely acknowledged his presence. At 4:47 p.m., he received a reminder from the Corporate Behavior and Compliance team. Attend your monthly bias in leadership module. Non-compliance may impact performance records. The final irony. They were burying him while reminding him to behave. By the end of the day, Dorian's name had disappeared from the active strategic staff board outside the 12th floor. The digital listing simply skipped from Daniels to Meyer, as if the M in Marks had never existed. He stood in front of that board for a while, backpack slung over his shoulder, watching as his own absence was lit in blue backlight for everyone to see. The following Thursday began like the others in the basement room. Cold air from a vent that never shut off, the constant humming of a half-functional vending machine, and Dorian Marks seated at his desk in near silence. He had grown used to the ghost-like quality of his new role, the passive omission of his duties, and the relentless stripping away of his access and relevance. He hadn't received a team email in 5 days. His badge only worked for the first 2 floors. His inbox had become a graveyard of automated reminders and non-urgent company bulletins, each one a reminder of how little he was now involved. But at 9:13 a.m., a surprise calendar invite popped up. Subject: Leadership Alignment and Communication Exercise. Location: Executive Training Hall, Floor 16. Sent by Colton Vexley's office. He stared at the notification, unsure whether to ignore it or prepare for another calculated blow. The attached note was brief: all mid to senior level staff required. Dorian Marks will be presenting first. Bring energy. There was no file attachment, no agenda, no explanation, just an order cloaked in ambiguity. Dorian hadn't spoken to Colton since the HR accusation. The case had gone nowhere. Emma Brissot never responded to follow-up emails from compliance, and the matter was quietly dismissed with no apology. The damage, however, had lingered. Now he was being called upstairs again. His gut told him not to go, but not showing up would only feed whatever narrative Colton was scripting behind closed doors. At 9:45 a.m., Dorian boarded the elevator alone and watched the numbers climb past the floors he used to know. When he stepped out onto 16, he was met with sleek leather chairs, glass-paneled walls, and the scent of high-end espresso. This floor was reserved for executive grooming and brand cultivation, an arena for those on the rise, which made his presence here all the more suspect. Inside the hall, at least 24 people filled the seats. Department heads, strategy directors, executive assistants with clipboards. All eyes shifted when Dorian walked in. A few offered forced smiles. Others quickly looked away. At the front of the room stood Colton, sleeves rolled up like he was preparing to lead a TED Talk. He grinned as Dorian entered. "Ah, there he is. The man of the hour," Colton said, loud enough to pull a few laughs from the crowd. Dorian approached cautiously. "You called on me to present?" he asked. "We thought it'd be good for morale," Colton replied, patting him on the back. "Bit of fun. Bit of insight. You're still full of ideas, aren't you?" Dorian eyed him, confused. "What topic am I presenting?" "That proposal of yours, the one from last quarter. Horizon something." Colton stepped aside and gestured to the screen behind him. "We've cleaned up for you. You just run through the slides. The team's eager to see what you've got." A technician clicked a remote. The first slide appeared on the screen. Dorian blinked. It wasn't his title slide. It was a pixelated clip art image of a sunrise over a mountain with the words "Let's Dream Together" in rainbow Comic Sans font. A low murmur of laughter spread across the room. Dorian's throat tightened. "I didn't make this," he said. "Keep going," Colton said cheerfully. "We edited it for clarity." The next slide came up. A stock photo of two people high-fiving under the heading "Synergy equals successiness." The bullet points beneath were clearly faked. Maximize the optimism quotient, empower happy thoughts, and make vibes your metrics. More laughter, louder this time. Dorian turned to Colton. "This is a joke." "No," Colton said with mock sincerity. "This is team building." The third slide hit. A fake quote attributed to Dorian. "If we embrace sparkle, ROI will follow." The crowd erupted. Some clapped. Others wiped tears from their eyes. Colton took center stage, holding up a finger like a game show host. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, "I give you our next poet laureate. Coming soon to a seminar near you, Dorian Marks and his award-winning TED Talk on the healing power of glitter." Laughter thundered around the room. It wasn't polite or restrained. It was loud, ugly, uncontained. The kind of laughter people used when they wanted to strip a man bare and leave his pride in pieces. Dorian didn't speak. He didn't move. He stood there, watching each slide mock a vision he had spent months building. The idea he had once believed could change the company. Colton grinned wide and clapped. "That's enough for now. We don't want to spoil the sequel. Back to work, folks. Let's give Dorian a hand." Applause followed. Not everyone clapped, but enough did. The room buzzed with cruel amusement as people packed up. Colton leaned in close to Dorian and whispered, "See? That's how you control a room." Then he patted his back again and walked off like a showman leaving the stage. Dorian stood frozen. It took him several minutes after the room cleared to move. The screen went dark. The technician unplugged the projector and offered no eye contact. The silence afterward was worse than the noise. It echoed in Dorian's ears all the way back to the elevator. He rode it alone again, back to the basement, back to invisibility. He sat at his desk and stared at the blank wall. His shoulders sagged. His hands clenched into fists. And for the first time in years, his eyes burned. But he didn't cry. He didn't allow that. He just sat there, swallowed by the shame, and forced his jaw to tighten. Because now it wasn't just his reputation that was being dismantled. It was his very identity. The following Monday, Dorian arrived early, more out of instinct than enthusiasm. The sting of last week's staged humiliation still burned behind his ribs, branding him from the inside. He hadn't spoken to anyone since the training fiasco. No one had offered condolences or even dared to acknowledge the event. And he didn't blame them. Silence was safer. He stepped into the basement office, barely noticing the buzzing vending machine or the lingering smell of stale coffee grounds, and flicked on the ancient monitor that had become his daily prison. He hadn't even gotten through half of his emails when a new message pinged at the top of his inbox. Subject: Realignment Initiative, effective immediately. The sender: Talent and Resource Coordination. He clicked it open and stared. The message wasn't addressed to him directly. It was a mass internal memo sent to all strategic teams. His name sat in bold halfway through the paragraph like a red flag. As part of Ridgewell's Q2 Realignment Initiative, Dorian Marks will be transitioning into a support role shadowing junior analysts across department rotations, with the goal of refining key fundamentals and cross-functional exposure. The language was sanitized, sterile, and deeply humiliating. There was no signature, no direct conversation, just this quiet dagger delivered with corporate indifference. He reread it 3 times, but the words didn't change. Shadowed junior analysts, fundamentals, exposure. They had stripped him of authority, not with a warning, not with a performance review, but with a casual, public notification buried in a broader email. Across the company, hundreds of employees had just read that he was being demoted, not formally, but symbolically. His mind ran through the implications. This wasn't a performance improvement plan, it was a public burial. A career erasure disguised as development. He stood up, heart pounding, and marched toward the elevator. The ride up to the 12th floor was silent, the hum of the cables above echoing like whispers in his ears. He stepped into the strategy department with measured urgency, hoping perhaps this was a mistake, an administrative error, a miscommunication that could be clarified with a face-to-face conversation. But when he reached his old desk, any hope he had vanished. The desk was empty, not just cleared, wiped. His files, books, framed family photo, even the office plant Marcy had given him last year were gone. His nameplate had been removed. In its place, a small yellow sticky note rested dead center on the bare surface. Written in blocky black ink were the words, "Try Starbucks." No name, no signature, just cruelty disguised as humor. He stared at it, hands slowly curling into fists at his sides, chest rising and falling with controlled breath. People passed by, and some of them glanced, but none of them stopped. The humiliation was complete. With one email and one sticky note, they had cut away the last remnants of his title, his space, his status. He turned away before his expression could crack, walking briskly to the corner office where Helena Crutchfield worked. He knocked once and stepped inside without waiting. Helena looked up from her screen, momentarily startled. "Dorian, is this real?" he asked, holding up his phone with the email still open. Helena's gaze shifted. She nodded slowly, placing her pen down with careful deliberation. "Yes, it's part of the restructure." The decision was finalized late Friday. "Without telling me," he said. "No conversation, no warning." "I didn't have control over the communication," she replied, folding her hands. "The directive came from above. I was going to meet with you this morning." "Shadowing analysts," he said flatly. "That's where you've placed me." "It's temporary," she said quickly. "Just until we assess the long-term alignment for your role. It's about rebuilding foundational synergy." "Don't," he interrupted, his voice sharp. "Don't insult me with buzzwords." She didn't respond. Her silence confirmed everything. "Was this Colton's idea?" he asked. She didn't answer. He turned, left the office, and returned to the elevator without another word. As the doors closed, he caught a glimpse of Marcy down the hallway, eyes wide, hand half raised as if unsure whether to wave or disappear. Back in the basement, his old workstation sat untouched. The computer still logged into his profile, the desktop frozen on the memo. He didn't sit. He stared at the screen, mind-numb. At 10:30 a.m., his calendar updated again. A new event appeared, Department Shadow Rotation Kickoff. Assigned host, Jason Lorne. Time, 11 a.m. Location: Conference Room B1. Jason was a junior analyst, fresh out of grad school, eager, over-caffeinated, and barely 2 months into his role. Dorian had once mentored him on how to navigate company platforms. Now he was being shadowed. He arrived at Conference Room B1 10 minutes early, dressed in his usual quiet armor, a charcoal blazer, white shirt, no tie. Jason entered 3 minutes later, looking sheepish and awkward. "Hey, they told me you'd be tagging along." "That's right," Dorian said, voice steady dspite the weight on his chest. Jason nodded and tried to smile. Cool. I've got a couple dashboards to review, and then we're sitting in on a vendor call. I guess I'll just run through everything like normal." Dorian nodded. "That's fine." Jason launched into an explanation of something Dorian had designed 18 months ago. He listened in silence, correcting nothing, offering no input, playing the role written for him by someone else. The meeting dragged. Every second felt like a blade. When it ended, Jason gave him a polite nod and said, "Hope that helped." Dorian only replied, "Sure." The rest of the day blurred. More invitations from analysts. More follow-ups from Helena. No one from leadership reached out. No apology for the email. No acknowledgement of the sticky note. At 5:17 p.m., he shut down his computer and walked out through the back entrance again, the same way he had every day for 2 weeks. As he stepped outside, the sun was already low, casting long shadows across the pavement. Dorian stood still for a moment, his eyes on the horizon, his shoulders heavy. He had done everything they'd asked. He'd stayed quiet. He'd taken the meetings. He'd played by their rules. And they had answered with silence, with mockery, with exile. But a voice at the back of his mind stirred, low, steady, clear. It told him this wasn't the end. It couldn't be, because men like Colton thought power was permanent. They never saw the storm until it broke over them. The few coworkers who acknowledged him did so with the same cautious sympathy you might give a man waiting for sentencing. By Friday morning, he had accepted his erasure as fact. His goal was no longer to succeed. It was simply to endure. That morning, he arrived early, as always, and logged into his workstation. The basement air felt heavier than usual, laced with something unspoken. By 9:04 a.m., a series of chuckles began echoing from other parts of the building, even from a floor above. At 9:17 a.m., Marcy sent him a message that broke his breath in half. "Check internal forum. I'm so sorry." His hands froze on the keyboard. Then he navigated to the internal comms channel, a digital space used for company updates, team wins, birthday announcements. At the top of the general feed was a new post, anonymous, posted just 12 minutes prior. The title read, "The Marx Manifesto, a Bathroom Classic." He clicked, and his stomach twisted. The post contained screenshots of his original Horizon Initiative proposal, overlaid with crude annotations, bright red arrows, sarcastic emojis, and snide commentary. One line had been highlighted in yellow, leveraging inclusive consumer perspectives. The comment attached, translation, "Let's ask TikTok how to run a billion-dollar company." Another screenshot mocked a sustainability suggestion, captioned, "Who needs profit when we have feelings?" At the bottom of the post, the author had added a poll. Where should this go next? The options were breakroom fridge, company bonfire, and bathroom stall reading material. Bathroom stall was winning by 72%. Dorian's vision narrowed. His pulse thudded in his ears. This wasn't a private jab or even a backroom joke. This was public degradation, a full-on assault on the last meaningful project he had poured himself into. And the post was getting reactions. Thumbs up emojis, laughing faces, a few heart reacts from fake accounts, likely stirred by Colton's hand or his silent supporters. He stood up abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. His hands trembled as he grabbed his badge and walked, not toward IT, not toward HR, but to the floor where the executive office sat like a castle on a hill. As he arrived on the 18th floor, the hallway went silent. The receptionist looked up but didn't speak. Dorian didn't wait. He walked straight to Colton Vexley's office and opened the door without knocking. Colton looked up from his tablet, unfazed. "Dorian," he said coolly, "can I help you?" "You know what's happening," Dorian said. His voice was low, but firm. "Take that post down. Now." Colton leaned back in his chair. "You think I'm behind a mean post?" He smiled. "I think someone's having a bit of a fragile Friday." "This is harassment," Dorian replied. "It's defamatory, and it's clearly targeting me." "Or maybe," Colton said, standing up and walking around his desk, "people are just tired of PowerPoint prophets who think they're revolutionaries." He stepped close, too close. "You had your moment, and it flopped. Now take your licks like a man and go back to shadowing kids who still believe in synergy." Dorian's jaw tightened. "You've crossed every line," he said. "One day, you're going to regret this." "Not today," Colton whispered, then turned to the hallway and called out, "Mona, can you call building security, please?" The receptionist appeared moments later, confused. "Sir." "Mr. Mark seems agitated. I'm not comfortable with him being in my office right now. Please have someone escort him back to his floor." "Are you serious?" Dorian asked, stunned. Colton turned back to him. "We're just making sure everyone's safe and comfortable. No hard feelings." Two security guards arrived within 5 minutes. They weren't aggressive, but they didn't need to be. One gestured toward the door. "Sir, we'll walk with you." Dorian stared at them, then back at Colton, who had already turned back to his desk, typing as if none of it mattered. Dorian nodded slowly. Of course. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He walked out with the guards, past the receptionist, past the hushed whispers of stunned employees who peeked from behind glass partitions. He felt every eye on him. Every ounce of powerlessness settled deeper into his bones. The walk back to the elevator felt endless. The guards didn't speak. They just walked beside him, a silent escort of humiliation. When they reached the lobby, one of them asked, "Do you want a moment before heading back in?" "No," Dorian said, voice flat. "There's nothing to head back to." He left the building without a word, walking past the security desk, through the revolving doors, into the wind. He didn't go home. He walked. For hours. Through the city, past strangers, past traffic, past everything that had once made sense. He thought about his first day at Ridgewell, how proud his parents had been, how he had smiled when he told them he'd finally made it into corporate leadership. He thought about all the nights he had stayed up fixing charts, building models, revising language to make his work airtight. He had given everything to this place, and they had returned it in pieces. A meme, a joke, a walk of shame under fluorescent lights. That evening, he sat alone in his apartment, the lights off, the city glowing outside his window. What remained of his self-respect refused to be a voyeur in his own undoing. He hadn't spoken to anyone from Ridgewell, not even Marcy, despite 3 unread emails flagged urgent. He deleted them all. He needed distance, silence, space to let the wreckage settle. Yet on Thursday morning, he received a call that shattered the quiet exile he had reluctantly settled into. The caller ID read private number, and he nearly let it ring out, but something deep and familiar compelled him to pick up. "Mr. Marks." The voice was female, clipped, professional. "This is Melanie Caraway, Executive Chair of the Ridgewell Board of Directors. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." He said nothing for a beat, unsure if it was a trap. "Why are you calling me? I'd like to speak with you. In person. Today, if possible." "About what?" "About Horizon." The silence that followed was not one of confusion, but realization. She continued, "Please, come to the Crest Room. 4 p.m. use the west entrance. You'll be met by staff. Discretion is important." She ended the call before he could ask another question. Dorian stared at the phone in his hand, heart accelerating with confusion and disbelief. For the first time in weeks, he changed into a suit with purpose. Not with the blind hope of being seen again, but with the quiet resolve of a man walking toward an overdue reckoning. When he arrived at the Crest Room, a secluded wing rarely used except for high-tier board deliberations and media briefings, he was greeted by an assistant who led him through the side corridor into a conference chamber unlike any other space in the building. Rich mahogany paneling lined the walls. Framed photographs of Ridgewell's founders hung like portraits of monarchs. The lighting was soft but surgical. The room reeked of history and control. Seated at the long glass table were 5 individuals, all of them board members. Melanie Caraway sat at the center, impeccably dressed, a steel gray folder in front of her. She gestured for him to sit. No small talk, no coffee offered, just silence and gravity. She opened the folder. Inside were pages from Horizon, the original proposal, unedited, unmocked, intact. It looked strange in this context, sacred almost. "This," she said, tapping the cover sheet, "was brought to us by an independent consultant 2 weeks ago. The consultant was retained for our upcoming structural overhaul, and their recommendations align almost identically with what you proposed months ago." Dorian said nothing. He simply watched, waiting. "The parallels," she continued, "are uncanny. The strategic shift, the metrics, even the digital equity framework, all of it, nearly word for word." And the board was impressed, very impressed. Dorian finally spoke. "So now it matters, because someone white with a consulting badge repackaged it." Melanie's expression didn't change. "We're not here to offer excuses. We're here because the situation has evolved. You should have been the face of this initiative. You weren't. And that was a mistake. Colton Vexley made sure of that," Dorian said. "He did." Melanie leaned back in her chair. "Which is why, effective immediately, we are suspending his operational control. There will be an investigation. But that's not the only reason we called you." She opened a second folder. Inside were archival photographs, company documents, handwritten notes. Your mother, Delilah Marks. She was a protege of Hamilton Kress. More than that, his goddaughter. He named you in an internal letter as his intended successor for the Innovation Division. We found it in the old Transition Planning Archive. Hamilton never updated it before his retirement. You were 17 at the time." Dorian stared at her, heart stalling in his chest. "I never knew. You weren't supposed to. Not then. But Hamilton left a legacy plan, a quiet blueprint for succession if the company ever deviated from its founding values. Your proposal reminded us of that." The others at the table remained still, watching him not with suspicion, but with a strange deference. "So what are you saying?" he asked. "We're inviting you back," Melanie replied. "But not to shadow analysts or sit in the basement. We're installing you as Interim Chief Innovation Officer, publicly, immediately, with full support." The room fell silent again. Dorian couldn't speak. Not from lack of words, but from a storm of them crashing into each other inside his skull. He thought of the humiliation, the exile, the hollow elevator rides, the sticky note. He thought of the meme post, the fake quotes, the laughter. And now they offered him a throne made from the rubble. "And if I say no," he asked, "then we'll have to go back to the consultants," Melanie said without flinching. "But it won't be as good, because you wrote it first." He exhaled, slow, hard. "What about Colton?" The next day began unlike any other. Dorian arrived not through the side lobby or the back entrance, but through Ridgewell's main glass doors, dressed in a midnight black suit that matched the controlled determination in his eyes. Every step he took reverberated with clarity. The employees he passed stared in quiet disbelief, some pausing mid-conversation, others pretending not to notice, as their eyes followed him down the corridor. The man they had mocked, humiliated, and erased had returned, not timidly, not silently, but with a gravity that made even the most dismissive pause. He made his way to the executive floor without a badge because Melanie Caraway herself met him at the elevator. "Welcome back, Mr. Marks," she said, with a kind of smile that hinted at both vindication and unfinished business. "Are you ready?" "I've been ready," he replied. Together, they walked into the Kress room where the full board had convened in closed session. The atmosphere was sharp, electric with consequence. Colton Vexley sat at the head of the table, unaware that his empire was already burning. He offered a smirk when he saw Dorian, one hand flipping a pen, the other resting on a leather folio like a king holding court. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon," Colton said. "Decided to drop off your resume in person?" Dorian didn't respond. Melanie took her seat and tapped the microphone. This session is now in executive motion, effective immediately. We are suspending Director Vexley's strategic authority pending investigation into conduct unbecoming of an executive officer. The words hit like a hammer in the silent room. Colton leaned forward, laughing dryly. "Excuse me. Your actions over the last 2 quarters," Melanie continued, "including public denigration of staff proposals, manipulation of performance reviews, orchestrated humiliation events, and possible unauthorized internal communications, have violated Ridgewell's leadership code of conduct." "You're out of your mind," Colton snapped. "That's absurd. Everything I did was board approved. You've seen the results." "We've also seen the evidence," she replied, nodding to a tech staffer who entered the room and placed a flash drive into the projector system. What followed was undeniable. Footage from the training exercise, where Dorian's slides were replaced. A screen recording of Colton editing Dorian's peer review under administrative access. An email trail linking Colton's assistant to the internal forum post leak. Silence fell over the board as each piece played out. When it ended, no one looked at Colton, not even his usual allies. "In accordance with Article 3.4 of our governance charter," Melanie said, "your authority is frozen pending final board vote. You may appeal, but as of this moment, you are relieved of active duties." Colton stood abruptly, mouth parted in disbelief. "This is a coup," he growled. "You're handing the company to a disgruntled analyst with a failed pitch and a pity card." "We're reinstating the original strategic visionary of the Horizon Initiative," Melanie corrected, "and also recognizing his legacy connection to this firm." Colton froze. "What?" "Dorian Marks," she said, turning to face the room, "is the named godson of Hamilton Kress, groomed quietly as a potential future leader and contributor to Ridgewell's innovation legacy." Colton looked between them, the color draining from his face. "You knew this?" he asked, voice cracking. "And you let me—" "That's the problem, Colton," Melanie said, standing. "You assumed too much and listened too little." Security entered the room. Not aggressively, just a presence. Colton stared at them, then at Dorian, who had said nothing since walking in. "You think you won?" Colton said bitterly. "You think a new office and a pity title erases what you are? You're still the guy no one wanted in the room." Dorian stepped forward finally, his voice low and controlled. "No, I'm a guy you tried to erase because I reminded you that real leadership doesn't need to humiliate to hold power." He looked at the board. "This isn't revenge. This is restoration." Colton said nothing more. He walked out with stiff shoulders, a man whose name had once ruled corridors, now echoing only behind closed doors. After he left, the room exhaled. Melanie turned to Dorian. "Your title, pending final vote, is Interim Chief Innovation Officer. You will report directly to the board and begin implementing the Horizon framework in collaboration with the transition team." "Understood," he said. "We've relocated your office," she added. "Come see it." She walked him down the hall to the corner suite Colton once called his throne. The nameplate was already replaced. D. Marks, Vision Officer. Inside, the room was freshly redecorated, sleek, modern, sunlight pouring in from glass walls. His original proposal sat on the desk, printed, bound, and waiting. A handwritten note on top read, "Welcome to your rightful place." Dorian stood for a long moment, hands at his sides, the weight of months of humiliation melting from his shoulders inch by inch. He walked to the chair, sat down, and looked out over the skyline. The company that had buried him had just put him at its helm. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He planned. Because leadership was not about vengeance. It was about vision. And now, finally, he had the power to build something lasting. The news didn't break. It detonated. Less than 48 hours after Colton Vexley was internally suspended and Dorian Marks reinstated to a seat of power, the internet caught fire with the leaked recordings. At first, it was a single clip posted anonymously on a business ethics blog, a grainy recording from someone's phone showing Colton standing beside a slide reading, "Let's dream together," as he waved his arms in mock reverence. His voice, unmistakable, rang out clearly. "This is what happens when we let feelings run a company. Vibes overvalue people. The laughter from the room followed, cold and uncontrollable. The video was time-stamped, and though the angle was from the back of the room, there was no mistaking the subject of ridicule standing silently at the front. Dorian, frozen, trying not to flinch under the weight of public humiliation. That first clip went viral within hours. Hashtag surfaced, hashtag corporate bullying, hashtag Ridgewell scandal, hashtag Mark's manifesto. Within a day, the video reached major financial news outlets. That alone might have stirred controversy. But then came the second leak. A screen recording from within Ridgewell's feedback portal. The footage displayed Colton logged into an admin account, manually altering performance reviews, removing neutral commentary, and replacing them with targeted red flags like emotionally unstable, defensive, and lacks leadership traits. The timestamp matched the week before Dorian's HR incident. The source of the leak remained anonymous, but the damage was undeniable. The board was forced into immediate crisis management. Melanie Caraway released a formal statement acknowledging the validity of the recordings, committing to transparency and internal restructuring. News vans parked outside Ridgewell headquarters by the end of the week. Former employees came forward, some anonymously, others publicly, sharing stories of being sidelined or silenced. A former HR intern leaked internal memos suggesting Colton had frequently weaponized the ethics process to target employees he labeled too idealistic. Pressure mounted from shareholders, clients, and the public. Ridgewell's quarterly forecast was shelved. Analysts questioned their leadership integrity on live broadcasts. Calls for accountability surged. Then came the email that confirmed the inevitable. All Ridgewell employees were invited to attend a special shareholder meeting. Mandatory attendance, press invited, leadership restructuring on the agenda. The room was set in Ridgewell's largest auditorium. Rows of chairs stretched across the floor, media lined the back wall, and a polished wood stage bore the company seal at center. The tension in the air was palpable. Dorian entered through a separate entrance reserved for board observers. He didn't sit on stage. He stood in the mezzanine gallery, watching from above, his expression unreadable. The board filed in first, followed by executive leads, department heads, and finally the man himself, Colton Vexley, dressed in an immaculate suit, hair perfect, jaw clenched with the forced confidence of a man who still believed he could spin the world back into his favor. The room hushed as Melanie Caraway stepped forward. Thank you all for joining us on short notice. Ridgewell has always prided itself on innovation, equity, and vision. In recent weeks, we've been reminded that leadership without accountability is not leadership, it's exploitation. She paused, letting the silence deepen. The recordings that surfaced this week are authentic. The actions shown are unacceptable, and the individual responsible is no longer representative of this company's values. The audience held its breath. Melanie turned slightly toward Colton, who still sat in the front row. Effective immediately, Colton Vexley is terminated from Ridgewell Industries, and his access to all systems and properties has been revoked. The reaction rippled across the room. Not applause, not outrage, just stunned silence. Colton didn't move at first. Then, slowly, he rose. His face was pale, expression tight. As he turned to leave, two security officers appeared at the aisle entrance, not threatening, simply present. Colton glanced at them, jaw twitching, then lifted his chin and walked toward the exit, spine straight, shoulders squared. But every step was loud, every footfall echoed, and every eye watched. Dorian from the mezzanine leaned forward slightly, not with malice, but with solemnity. This was not triumph. It was reckoning. Colton passed beneath him without looking up. The cameras followed. The media captured every second. The man who had laughed in a room full of executives as he tore down a vision meant to elevate the company now exited, that same company as a national example of everything wrong with corporate power structures. Outside, cameras flashed. Questions were shouted. Colton didn't answer. He just climbed into the back of a black SUV and disappeared into the swarm of lenses and lights. Inside, Melanie turned back to the audience. "We move forward," she said. with eyes wide open and a leadership team that reflects not just performance, but purpose. Later that afternoon, the company issued a press release announcing Dorian Marks as the official Chief Innovation Officer. No interim, no temporary. His new bio appeared on the website within the hour. By evening, interviews were requested by every major outlet. Dorian declined them all. He didn't want to make headlines. He wanted to rebuild. But that evening, as he sat in his office, formerly Colton's, he allowed himself one moment of reflection. He pulled open the desk drawer and found a leftover notepad branded with Colton's initials. He tore off the top sheet, crumpled it, and tossed it into the trash. Then he replaced it with a new one, inscribed in smooth lettering, D. Marks Vision Office. He leaned back, looked out the window, and exhaled. Justice hadn't been swift. It hadn't been painless, but it had arrived. And now the work could begin. It had been 6 months since the public collapse of Colton Vexley and the rapid reshaping of Ridgewell under Dorian Marks' new leadership. In that time, the company had not only recovered its reputation, it had reinvented itself. The Horizon Initiative rolled out in phases, each one greeted with both internal and external praise for its innovation, transparency, and dedication to inclusive growth. Staff engagement reached record highs, stock performance stabilized, and Ridgewell's internal culture began shifting from the top down. But what quietly stirred interest across boardrooms and business schools alike wasn't just Ridgewell's transformation. It was Colton Vexley's stunning fall and equally unexpected emergence in a wholly different light. After his firing, Colton vanished from public life for a brief period. Rumors swirled. He was hiding in a villa, fleeing litigation, planning revenge. But none of them proved true. When he resurfaced, it wasn't in a luxury office or political fundraiser. It was on a modest stage in a university auditorium in Baltimore, speaking to a group of business students about failure, bias, and accountability. The footage spread online almost immediately, with many expecting deflection, bitterness, or corporate jargon. Instead, Colton stood in front of the crowd in a simple shirt and blazer, his hair grayer, his voice slower, and began with one line: "I built my career on the illusion of control, and I lost it because I mistook cruelty for leadership." He went on to detail his abuse of authority at Ridgewell, the power games, the need to dominate rather than inspire. He spoke not defensively, but painfully honestly. "When I mocked someone else's vision, it was because I had none of my own. When I tore down Dorian Marks, it wasn't strategy, it was fear. I judged talent by the mirror, not the merit. I thought empathy was weakness. Now I see it's the foundation of real leadership." The audience was stunned. That night, the video hit 1 million views. The corporate world didn't rush to embrace him, but they didn't cancel him either. Over the following months, Colton spoke at panels about diversity failures, hosted workshops on leadership ego, and even contributed to a white paper titled "From Power to Purpose: Rebuilding Trust in Leadership." Meanwhile, Dorian's influence at Ridgewell only deepened. He launched a mentorship initiative called Elevate, aimed at identifying and developing talent from historically overlooked backgrounds: students from state colleges, veterans re-entering the workforce, immigrants rebuilding careers. He held monthly roundtables with junior staff. He restructured feedback systems to ensure bias detection, transparency, and accountability. Employees who once walked hallways with heads down now offered ideas openly. At every meeting, Dorian listened more than he spoke. And yet, despite his growing stature, he carried no air of vengeance. One rainy Friday morning, as he reviewed candidate names for Elevate's first external advisory committee, he paused over a resume recently submitted through a third-party referral. It was sparse. No company name, no title, just a name: C. Vexley. Attached was a letter, not formal, handwritten. "Mr. Marks," it began, "there is no version of this request that doesn't feel unearned. I spent years believing power was a ladder to stand on, not a platform to lift others. I learned too late that those we try to silence are often the ones we should have followed. I'm not asking for a second chance in your company, just a chance to give something back to the system I abused. If there's any way I can contribute to Elevate off the record, Behind the scenes, I'd be honored to try." Dorian read it twice, then closed the file. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked to the office window and stared out at the cityscape, streets below buzzing with ambition and noise. He thought of his first days at Ridgewell, the basement, the sticky note, the laugh that haunted him for months. But he also remembered something his mother once said: "The difference between a villain and a lost man is what he does after the truth finds him." That afternoon, Dorian added Colton's name to the advisory roster, not as a figurehead, not as a redemption stunt, but as a silent observer. No press release, no fanfare, just inclusion, quiet and earned. Weeks later, during an Elevate orientation for first-year interns, Colton sat quietly in the back row, listening as young professionals, some barely older than college freshmen, shared their dreams, fears, and goals. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He was learning again from the place he once tried to control. One of the interns approached Dorian after the session. "That guy in the back, he used to be someone, right?" Dorian looked at her and smiled faintly. He still is, just in a different chapter. That night, Dorian returned to his office and placed a new quote above his desk, replacing the mission statement he'd written months ago. It read, "Justice doesn't end with punishment. It begins with change." The lights in the building dimmed as the day came to a close, but the work and its meaning stretched far beyond the glass and steel. The message was no longer whispered in meeting rooms or scribbled in side memos. It had become the culture, the structure, the legacy. And Dorian Marks had not just survived the storm. He had rewritten the weather. The end. If you've been gripped by this story of power, betrayal, and redemption, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of Dorian's journey and Colton's fall? Which moment hit the hardest for you? Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what you'd do if you were in Dorian's shoes. Would you have offered Colton that second chance? Let's talk about it.